Hello, and welcome to the Master Coaches Wednesday Weekly Buzz. I'm Bob Bertucci, joined with fellow Master Coaches Jim Stone and Mick Haley. Today we have a special guest with us, Jen Spicher, who is the CEO for the Pro Volleyball Federation. And she will be answering some of the burning questions about the upcoming PVF draft. Welcome, Jen.
Well, thank you so much, Bob, Mick, and Jim for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Jim, why don't we go ahead and get right into it?
Okay, I'm first, huh? Okay. Well, first of all, Jen, welcome. And, a huge congrats for what you've accomplished to date. And I know you're churning away 24/7. But we're all appreciative of your efforts to date. And I know you have a draft coming up, and you've got 7 teams, active teams. Can you explain a little bit in terms of the draft format, how many rounds there might be, and any other tidbits of information you might provide that people might be interested in?
Sure. So we actually, hot off the press, we've just decided to hold our draft in Atlanta on December 11th. We're going to have all of our coaches down there, and all of their tech people are going to be down there for a couple of days of meetings with our production teams that we're signing up to do our matches. And it's going to be 5 rounds of draft. We've picked our draft order, and that's coming out shortly in a press event. And so, yeah, we're on our ways. We're on our way to having a very terrific draft event for the first year.
Jen, and welcome back. This is always an interesting time. I've got so many questions. I don't know where to start, but while you're doing this draft, let's also talk about international players. Will they be eligible for the draft, and do they have to be in college?
The draft is only for college eligible players. That is correct. I know of a couple of international players who are what we would consider COVID seniors or super seniors. They would be eligible, but we have to remember that we're only allowing 2 international players in this first year. And so if a team already has their international players, they would have to draft these, and then obviously they have to cut down to 2 before their active roster. So they certainly are eligible, but they would have to cut down to 2 internationals for their active roster starting in the season.
Well, Jim, that's
okay.
Interesting.
I'm going to pass it along again.
Now,
Jim, do you have some more questions? Or Bob? Maybe Bob.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask Jen about the Puerto Rican players. Will they be considered American players?
So they are U.S. citizens, right? The folks in Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens, and therefore we are not considering them as internationals for our league. However, as you all know, they are FIVB, Federation of Origin is Puerto Rico. And so we do have to transfer their FIVB Federation of Origin in order for them to play in our league. And we are going to do that. In fact, I just sent a pretty long list over to Carla, because we have a number of Puerto Rican players that are playing in our league this year.
Hey, okay, I'll go. I kind of went out of order, first of all, so I apologize for that with my first question.
That's okay.
But I'll try to do damage control here with the second question. Jen, kind of from a 10,000 foot perspective, is anybody, I'm speaking of American players now, is anybody that declares for the draft eligible to be drafted, be they collegiate players or post-college? All they have to do is declare, and they're part of the game?
Well, so actually, we are not asking anybody to declare. It's a lot safer for the athlete if they don't necessarily declare for a draft. We are doing our due diligence and researching. Each of the coaches is researching. As you can imagine, it's a little bit more difficult this year because you've got COVID years that can be taken. You've got super seniors. And so, we have been communicating directly with the volleyball operations folks at the top 100 volleyball playing schools in the United States, and asking them to help us identify those that are interested in the draft. And so we're creating lists, and the coaches are out, looking at tape, looking at video. They're visiting the games and trying to identify, which players they want to take in the inaugural draft season.
Jen, I'm not sure if I understood that. This is Mick again, but so do they have to sign up, or is everybody eligible and you're just going to, I assume you would contact them first to see if they're interested before you drafted them. If I'm a coach, I would want to.
That is exactly what we're doing right now.
I
Yeah,
see.
that is what we're doing. They do not have to declare. And like I said, it makes it safer for the athlete if they choose not to, if they, for some reason, if they do get drafted and they choose not to come, if they didn't declare, it makes it easier. It's safer for them to keep their eligibility. And that's of the utmost important for us. We don't want to take a player who has remaining eligibility. And as you can imagine, there's lots of questions there with COVID and the super senior situation.
Well, and maybe one other question from a college coach's standpoint. Let's say I'm a college coach. I'm 2 weeks out from hopefully getting a bid to the NC2A tournament. And all at once, the PBF is on the phone to some of my players talking about the draft. Are you getting any pushback from the coaches on that?
So as I mentioned earlier, we're working with the colleges directly. We're working with the volleyball operations directors.
I see.
We're working with the assistant coach, the associate head coach, because to your point, you're absolutely correct. We don't want to change the focus for an athlete. And, we're getting the names of those that are interested in our draft. And then, we're communicating with the coaches, with their parents, for example, directly, so that we do not necessarily hamper or hinder the athlete's experience and what they're going through right now.
That sounds like a massive kind of thing. Is that what you're experiencing?
Yes. That's why I'm up all hours of the night, Jim Love. Or Jim Stone, sorry. Jim Stone. I used to work with the Jim Love. That's what it is.
Well,
that answers my question.
Then that makes sense. But let's talk a little bit more about the implications of the draft on the college athletes' NCAA eligibility. By having an open draft and the athletes not having to declare, then you can actually start drafting the athlete, and then it's a matter of them deciding whether they want to become a pro athlete or not.
It's up to them. If they want to go back to their college, they can do that. If they don't declare, then they don't have to necessarily do anything, right? If they do declare, then they would have to inform their athletic office or their compliance officer within X amount of hours in order for them to keep their eligibility. So by not declaring, they're not going to lose any eligibility if they don't come into the league.
But if I'm a team and I choose one of those
so follow
athletes,
up to that. That was exactly the question I was going to be asking.
Go for it.
Yeah, it was what Mick was saying. So I'm in the draft. I decide I'm going to draft player X for my team. All right. What happens if she decides she's not going to accept that opportunity and she's going to stay with her college? Does that mess up the draft?
No, they just won't have the fourth player or the third player. But that's exactly the exercise that the coaches are going through, and we're actually identifying those that are telling us that they're committed to being drafted by Pro Volleyball Federation. There are some women that are playing in the NCAA right now that have told us that they're not certain if they're going to play for us or if they might go to Europe. We've had a couple of players say, we're absolutely taking our super senior year and do not draft me this year. And so that's part of mine and my team's job. As you know, I have some player relations associates that I work with that are doing a lot of grassroots, and it is a lot of work, Mick, to your point. And then, once we get them identified into one of those three categories, right? Absolutely going to be and want to be playing for the Pro Volleyball Federation, or not sure, maybe needs a little bit of more communication, or even, not interested at all. And then they go on the various lists, and the coaches are responsible for doing that research and identifying those players through a number of means. Again, not necessarily directly talking to the athlete, but talking to their parents, talking to their representatives, talking to their compliance folks and their assistant and associate head coaches.
So I was going to say, though, Bob, I was going to take this a little bit farther. So I'm a coach. I draft player X. She decides to stay in school. Do I own her rights because I spent a draft pick on her? Do I own her rights for next year? Or at what point do I lose out on that draft?
You do not own her rights for next year. If the athlete returns to school, she's eligible for the draft next year at this time.
I see. So you really want to know if somebody's interested or not before you draft them. I would feel very vulnerable if I didn't have a pretty secure commitment from the athlete before I drafted them that they were going to come, because you lose out. There's only 5 rounds, as you said, so I only get 5 choices, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. And so what about then the players that are playing overseas? Do I just go after them independently of the draft, or are they
are considered free agents because they no longer are in college? And just like this year, when the coaches were named and they went out and scouted players and connected with players directly, they have the ability to work with those folks that are currently playing in Europe or overseas directly, and they would not be considered part of the draft. Draft is for college players coming out of college only.
So then once I've drafted, I make my selection. Sorry, I'll just finish this. Once I've made my selection, what then takes place? What do the players get because they're drafted? What are the things that are available to them? Do they get housing? They obviously sign a contract. Is it a preliminary contract to make the team, or is it a primary contract that lasts for the year? What all transpires from being drafted and then accepting that draft?
Yep. So once they accept the draft, they would get a contract. It's the standard player agreement that all of our 94 women that have executed this contract for this first year have signed. They do get provided housing during training camp. Training camp will begin for all the teams in January, and the training camp start dates depend on the start date of their first match. So, for example, the first match, as you know, is Omaha against Atlanta. The Atlanta Vibe are going to Nebraska, and that match is January 24th. And those two teams are going to start a day earlier in training camp than the Columbus Fury and the Grand Rapids Rise, because they play the very next day. And then Orlando is going to start the next day after them because their first match is that Friday. So in order to continue to keep the fairness of the league, we don't want somebody on court training camp more than 21 days. And that's what that's all set up for. But once you get to training camp, you get a weekly stipend. Each player gets a weekly stipend. All meals are taken care of. Their housing is taken care of, and there'll be transportation available to them.
So there's one other question then, that can you trade a draft pick, and can you hoard, so to speak, future draft picks? What would you do, Jim? Would you hoard draft picks if you were real successful in getting your first line of athletes up? How would you do that?
Well, I think the first part of your question, Mick, is kind of interesting. If I had the first pick, or maybe reverse, if I had the 5th pick, and I might, or I'll phrase this in the question, could I take a player and the draft pick and try to move up and trade with somebody who is 2nd or 3rd in the draft? I hope that question makes sense, Jen.
So it does, and you can. The draft order, as I mentioned, that somebody wants a player pretty bad and they have the 6th draft pick, they could certainly draft or trade up for the 1st draft pick. And then that person would obviously ask for something and either get it or not get it, right?
Interesting. So, and we're kind of going a little bit off on a tangent here because I want to get away from the draft and ask you another question. But before we leave, can players, once they're on a roster, be part of that trade that you just alluded to?
They could be.
So, I mean, I looked at the PV or the website last night, and some teams have a pretty extended roster and some not as much, that's fine. But could somebody, for example, on one of the franchises that's listed, be part of a trade package, and all of a sudden they're going from Grand Rapids to Orlando? Is that a possibility?
Jim, this is real pro volleyball. Yes, 100%.
Very good. Well, let me follow up real quick, Jen, on a roster size question. And as I mentioned, some of the teams have an extended roster and some not as much, at least in terms of listed on the website. So if a team has 14-ish players on the roster now and they draft 5 players, what kind of decisions are the coaches or the franchises making in terms of roster size then?
So each of the teams is allowed to bring up to 30 players into training camp. As you can see by some of the rosters on our website, some of the coaches are bringing in a little bit larger group. Some are bringing in a little bit smaller group. It's really up to the coaches on how and who they decide to bring into training camp. But there are mandatory cut dates. So X amount of days after your training camp starts, you have to be down to 24. And then X amount of days after that, you have to be to 18. And then X amount of days, I think it's 48 hours before the first match, they have to be to an active roster of 14. But one of the things that we're doing is we are allowing each team to have 2 practice players. Those practice players must be college drafted players. And that gives our college draftees the opportunity to come in and make a team, or at least get a decent look. As you can imagine, when you look at the average tenure of the professional women that we have signed, of the 90, I think it's 94, 95 ladies, we have an average tenure of 4.8 years of playing professionally. So, we want to give the college drafted players an opportunity to make a roster. And so we're allowing each team to carry 2 practice players, but those practice players must be college drafted players.
Who handles all these squabbles that are going to come up?
That actually protects your drift a little bit.
I think you're looking at her.
Nick, you and I are having trouble today.
I think you're looking at her. No, myself and my team will handle it. Every time there's a transaction, there's a transaction wire that goes out every single day. And every time there's an action that happens, the transaction wire goes out, comes to me, a request form comes to me. I either approve or deny, and then we get that out on the wire, the waiver wire that night.
This sounds like when I was growing up and you get the sporting news to see who got traded and who got brought up and who got sent down the next day. And if you were the first one to get the sporting news, you could win the baseball initials contest for that day. This could be quite exciting. How do you publish it? I can assure you that
every now and then, Dr. Cecile Renaud, who you all know very well, sends me a text going, really?
So when you say you send it out, you just send it out to the teams, but will it go out in the newspapers or will it go out digitally somehow?
So right now it goes out to the teams. I'm sure that we'll have it up on our website when the league starts. But right now the teams get it first, and it's up to the teams to market their information. So just like, as you can imagine, I mentioned we have 95 players that we've signed, but not all have been announced by the teams. That's because they're doing their own marketing efforts in their markets and bringing the players on through Instagram and social media and whatnot at their timing.
So can I ask Jim another question? And Jen, you listen in on this. So So, Jim, would it be advisable for me to actually expose my roster before I draft? Because some people might see the strength of my roster and choose not to go to my team, but want to be drafted by another team because they see a better opening. What would you think of that?
Well, I think that's an interesting question, and I think it could turn both ways. I think if I'm a hitter and I see, well, heck, that team's got a great setter, I'm going to go that direction. Conversely, it could turn against you if I'm the second best setter, and there's somebody out there that might be considered better, then I might go a different direction. So it could turn both ways. But I think Jen, the points you're making are kind of exciting, and I'm interested with how the players deal with kind of a level of uncertainty in terms of, well, I'm with this team now, but I may not be next week. Which is, that's the nature of the beast when you get to pro sports. And you go back to Kevin Costner, or not Kevin Costner, who Brad Pitt played in Moneyball, when he was saying, hey, they're pros. If you're going to cut somebody, you just cut them. So it's something that's going to be, especially for the players just coming out of college, that's going to be kind of a different environment than certainly what they're used to.
Yeah. I think most of the players would tell you they're just thrilled that they have an opportunity to play in the United States of America, period. And they do. And I know they're all kinds of excited about that. We actually had an all-player call yesterday where we allowed them to kind of go through, they have a player policy manual, and they went through it and gave them an opportunity to ask questions. And I was very interested that there wasn't a single question about trades, cuts, the waiver wire, any of it. I think that the information we shared in the manual was extremely thorough and very detailed, and they understand it. And they understand that they're professional, and they want to compete with the best, and they're going to compete with the best. And they understand if they get cut, over here, that they go to the waiver wire list, and every single of the other teams has a chance to either pick them up or pass on them. And so there's opportunities for them to play. And as you have seen, we also have named some new markets for next year. We've named Kansas City. We've named Dallas. We have 2 more that are done, and we haven't named yet, but we will. I expect we'll get to 12. We very well may get to 14 next year. And so that's another, 50 to 75 players that we need for 2025 to play in our league. So that's a great opportunity for women that are currently playing in Europe and maybe didn't sign up for Pro Volleyball Federation this year due to the timing of our contracts, which Mick, the last time we spoke, and Bob, the last time I was on in March, that we were literally trying to get our contracts done so that we could get them to the women who were overseas. And I will tell you, there isn't a week that goes by that I don't get a phone call from somebody that I spoke to in March that was in Italy or in Turkey or in Azerbaijan or in Greece. And they called me up. Last week I got one and said, I made a mistake. Is there any room for me in the league this year? And you know what? That's not my decision. That's the coach's decision. And so I put out on the waiver wire that somebody's available. This is their contact information, and they go to work. That happened with Sam Dreschel. She was literally overseas, and now she's playing for the Fury. I just met her last Monday. And, she had an opportunity to get out of her contract legitimately because something happened with the coach or the team. And so she picked the phone up, and now she's playing for Pro Volleyball Federation.
Hey, Jen, I'm going to go back in time here just a little bit to our previous discussion of college athletes. And this may be a problematic question in terms of definitive answer, but dealing with the NC2A, like I know basketball players can do some things during the summer leading into training camps where they kind of get an idea of their value. And then they can go back to college if they don't think they're going to be a high enough draft pick or whatever the scenario is. I'm assuming you've had discussions with the NC2A. Do you see any movement like that as the league moves forward, where kids kind of test the waters without committing to the draft?
Yeah, I believe that there's one opportunity that a college eligible player could do some type of a tryout, if you will, and then go back to their eligibility. We may or may not get into that in the future. Obviously, this year with trying to get this league up and running, there wasn't time for it. And with all the experienced athletes coming back, we just we didn't have an opportunity to do that. So I think it's a growing thing for us, and certainly as we grow, that may be something that we do, but nothing that we talked about for this first year.
Fair enough.
Jim, we're having some difficulties with the internet with the Bob. How about if we try to let Bob ask 2 or 3 of his questions all together? Bob, if you can hear this, you've got several questions. We'll just give you the floor. Why don't you ask most of your questions at one time from Jen so that maybe we can get this technical difficulty straightened out?
Thanks, Mick. A couple of the questions I had, Jen, it was a follow-up question that, a little bit earlier that I wanted to ask you. Is this draft, you said college players, but is it just for seniors and fifth-year players, or can the coaches draft anybody, freshman all the way through senior if they wanted to?
As you can imagine, you've seen a lot of leagues set draft rules. And the first thing that happens is somebody challenges those rules, and then they end up in court, and the player gets their wish. It happened with the NWSL. It's happened a lot with other leagues. So we did set the draft age at 18. As you can imagine, 18 is pretty young, and none of those players necessarily might be tested at the pass serve game. So it really is up to the coaches who they want to draft. They can draft anybody, and like I said, that's one of the reasons we chose not to have athletes declare. It was the safest way to make sure that if they wanted to remain with their teams and keep their eligibility, that they could.
And you kind of alluded to this a little earlier, mainly talking about top tier collegiate athletes, first and second team All-Americans. Do you think they, their whole life, they've decided what club they're going to play on? They've decided what college they're going to play with. Do you see any problem with them, preferring to pick the team, the Italian team or the Greek team or the Turkish team that they want to play for, as opposed to going to the draft? Or are you finding that's not an issue?
Well, again, I'm hoping, and hope is a strategy, not really, but I'm hoping they're just excited to play on U.S. soil, right? Regardless of where they play. I think it's better that they're a 3-hour plane ride than a 13-hour plane ride, don't you?
Me for sure.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I mean, I'm sure,
I know. I'm going to steal one of Jim's questions. Jim, I think you wanted to find out how they decided who's going to be the first team that got to draft.
So I recorded the meeting. We did it on a Zoom because we didn't have time to get all the coaches into an area. And Dr. Cecile had one set of ping pong balls with numbers on it, and Lori Corbelli, our Olympian, had another set of numbers with ping pong balls with numbers on it from 1 to 7. And Dr. Cecile was first, and she drew the ping pong balls so that they understood which order they were going to pick in. And then we picked the order of who was the first draft pick and who was the second. And I'll make sure that you know that it's a snake draft, right? So whoever gets 1 is then going to be 14, whereas whoever gets 7 is also going to be 8. And that's how we did it. We put ping pong balls in a Pro Volleyball Federation hat, and we pulled them out.
So that's pretty interesting. So the best position may not be first, because you could select a setter and a libero if you were 7, because you would go 7th and 8th. And if you covered a couple of areas, this is kind of like doing the fantasy football. You look at everybody goes for the quarterback first, but if you get to draft 2, you get 2-point scorers quick. You could say the same thing in volleyball. I mean, we're looking at point scorers. Is that right, Jim? Is that what you would look for? Point scorers or leaders?
Sure.
Yeah. So that's pretty interesting. Any pushback on doing the draft that way?
None.
Bob, did you have another question?
Well, I just maybe to move to some more team-specific questions. Unless either of you or Jim have questions about the draft. I think Jen's answered most of the draft questions. But I'm interested in who's the general manager and the coaching staff for San Diego Reveal.
Well, did you see Taiba Hanif Park up there?
No, tell us about that.
All right. So Kerry Walsh Jennings is one of the owners, the leading managing partner. They've just hired a gentleman by the name of Billy Johnson, who's terrific, as their president. Jeremy Waller is their vice president of volleyball operations and general manager. He's wonderful. Taiba Hanif Park, 3-time Olympian, 2-time silver medalist. She is their head coach. And they just literally had their entire team over in mini camp. I'm sure you've seen some of the social medias. Yeah, they're doing great. And that's the team. She does have a couple of assistants that haven't been named yet, and I'm not going to blow her cover and share that with you yet, but I'm sure there'll be names that you know well. So
here's a good question. So how do you pick the names? Your league has some very interesting names, and you can tell us all the names. But does Vegas have a name yet? Does Dallas have a name yet? Does Kansas City have a name yet? And how do you select these names for the league?
Well, the owners do it. That's part of their thing of owning a team, is they get to select their name, and they work very closely with Stephen Evans and his team down in Frisco. Stephen, as you know, owns a company called the Remedy Branding, and he does all of the artwork. Him and his team do all the artwork, and we go back and forth with them and the ownership group on color schemes and mascot or logo. And ultimately the owners decide, and there's a number of back and forth with that. I believe the Vegas name has been finalized, but I'm not 100% on that. I've seen a couple of logos, and it's pretty cool. I know Dallas has some things narrowed down, and I don't know where KC is yet.
Interesting. And how about sponsors, Jen? What is the league doing with sponsors? Do the individual teams control the sponsorships? The league control the sponsorships? What can the individual teams do, and what does the league control?
Yeah, so there are league assets, obviously, and then there are individual team assets. So the answer is yes to both. The league assets, for example, like across the top of the net, that might be a league asset, right? But sponsor logos on a court could be just that. It could be the team's assets. The teams are definitely responsible for selling sponsorships, as is the league. And so we're working hand in hand together to get that done.
And how about uniforms?
Well, we chose Ren Athletics as our apparel company recently. That press release was out. We've been working with Conrad Sun and the Ren team very closely. They've been absolutely terrific in working with us. We have real pro uniforms. We have a whole pro collection that is being innovated by us. Our pros were down there. I was with them on the apparel trip where they selected all of the items that they're going to get in their gear haul when they get to training camp. And it's a real Lululemon-like feel. I mean, the apparel is very nice. I'm actually wearing some of it as we speak. And Ren has been terrific, and we're excited to be their partner in this endeavor.
Do you have a shoe contract or any of those kinds of things?
No, we don't have that yet. We're going to allow the athletes to wear the shoes that they want to wear. And that's a big piece of their equipment, as you can imagine. And they, need to select it. Some of them do have shoe deals, and some of them I expect will have shoe deals after our first season. I think many of them will. And that's the whole point of this is to create some phenomenal athletes with our sport and give them opportunities just like some of the male athletes that we have in the United States.
And do you have a special ball, or are you using the international ball?
We have a special partnership with a company, and that ball has been made for us. Real Pro Volleyball has been made for us directly.
Hey, Jen, I have kind of a double-headed question. One is, since Las Vegas was your last, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but the last entry in terms of your roster of teams, can you give us kind of an overview of that franchise and what you found attractive about locating in Vegas? And then maybe the second part of that question is, would you want to use Master Coaches podcast to unveil new teams for next year?
So first of all, to answer your first question, Ruben Herrera is our general manager out there. He's a longtime volleyball fan. We've hired Fran Flory to be our head coach. Obviously, you all know Fran very, very well. She's then hired Denise Corlett, who everybody seems to know, Nisi. And then Melody Noel is the other assistant. And that's that team. The ownership group there, I think, was in our press release. That more owners will be more investors for Vegas will be announced at a later time. But that's a terrific market, and it's an exciting market, and it's accepted the aces pretty strongly. So we're excited about Vegas coming on board. We're also excited about Dallas. I mean, Dallas is a top 10 sports market in the country. Kansas City, I mean, those fans are crazy, right? And it's a huge volleyball market, as you all know. So the next two teams that we announce will also be very similar characteristics to the ones we just talked about.
No disclosures today, though.
Nick's tried to get it out of me before. It ain't happening.
Well, I'm still trying.
The last time I was on, I think he asked the same question 5 different ways, and I said, "Yeah, that's still not going to happen."
I did, and you were very good.
Persistent, Jim.
Jim, did you have anything else you wanted to throw?
No,
in
I think that's a wrap.
Well,
man, go ahead, Bob.
Well, I was going to ask Jen, if she was asked to participate in the ABCA convention in Tampa, Florida. You mentioned that, the draft's going to be in Atlanta, if I understand you correctly. I was under the impression maybe it was going to be at the ABC convention. Have they asked you to do anything at the convention?
Yeah, absolutely. We've been on the phone with Jamie Gordon and his team. They've asked us to conduct the opening session, the 4:00 first session on Wednesday night for kind of the group that pays a little bit more. I think, I don't know what they're called, but they pay a little bit more to have access to all the sessions. And our very own Logan Tom and Angel Perez are going to be conducting that session. 2 of our, obviously, coaches and consultants that have probably the most professional experience. Obviously, Logan's played overseas for over 20 years, and Angel has also played and now coached overseas. And so they're going to do that session, and Dr. Cecile Renaud will be facilitating it. In addition, as you can imagine, the ABC poll of the match from Saturday night up into Sunday at 3:00 on ABC has created a bit of a hole for the ABCA, and they have asked us if we wanted to take that session, and so we're actually throwing a huge party. More to come on that, but we will be having that party Saturday night. It'll be kind of the Pro Volleyball Federation, get ready, here we come, and lots of people will be invited. So you don't want to miss it. I know you both, but Jim, are you going to be down there?
50-50 right now. Not sure.
So that's a Saturday evening time slot after 7:30. We're going to throw a pretty nice party. So
well, that might get me leaning the other way then.
Yeah, we didn't have anything to do Saturday night, so hope we get invited. That'll be great.
Lots of good things are going to happen at that party.
Yeah. I think, you sponsored a little get together last year that I was at and had a very good time. And I got to meet some of the inside people that are part of the league and have really been behind the scenes doing a lot of good work. Got to talk with you also. So I think for people who want to know what PBF is all about, they will want to come to this party and get to meet you guys. And hopefully some of the players will be there. I don't know if they will attend, but that seems to me to be a pretty good promotion for not only them, but for the league, I would think.
Absolutely.
It would be fun. And let me ask Bob. Bob, any final questions before we let Jen go? We've kept her a little longer than probably we told her we would. We have a 5-second lag, so we have to wait for Bob to use up these 5 seconds here.
Well, no, I think, Nick, I think that wraps up the interview with Jen Spicher. And Jen, thank you very much, all right, for coming on and joining us and providing valuable insight into the PVF draft, as well as some of the things that are going on in the PVF. It's a very exciting time for volleyball, and we can't wait for the upcoming season.
Me too. Thanks, guys. Appreciate you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks a lot for coming back on. It's great to get the firsthand information. Thank you again, and thank everybody in the organization.
Will do. Thanks, guys. Take care.
All right. Bye-bye. And now time for the weekly buzz.
Let's go ahead and switch into the weekly.
Jim, I think the weekly buzz is how do we get Bob fixed? We can't get Bob fixed. He's a 5-second guy. Good thing you're not running the sprints, Bob. You'd be 5 seconds out of the blocks late.
I'd be behind everybody.
How do you want to do the buzz, Bob?
Well, let's just go ahead and maybe review some of the things that Jen mentioned. I'm still a little confused. It sounds like any college athletes is eligible for this draft, and the coaches and the organization is doing a lot to find out who's interested in moving forward. So, Mick, maybe a question that you had asked me, off air, was you had coached some athletes that just college wasn't their thing. They wanted to go to pro right away. It looks like this might be possible because they don't have to declare. It's just a matter of somebody wanting it.
Yeah, I had, and Jim, you want to jump in on this too, but I had at least 3 athletes who, for one reason or another, studying was very difficult for them, and an education was something they felt that they had already gotten, and they wanted to play volleyball 24/7, and they would have jumped at a chance to go directly to a pro league in the United States. They could have gone to the pro leagues overseas and were offered opportunities to do that, but they wanted to stay in the United States. This now offers an opportunity for that small number of people that are exceptional athletes who could actually go to the pros early. Did you experience any of that, Jim, when you were at Ohio State or any of the other places?
Well, I mean, I didn't experience it because it probably wasn't a huge option for them. I mean, I found that most players, they want to go to school, but it's easy to make that choice when the plan B is going to Turkey, so that wasn't really a huge option for most players. Now, the upper 5% probably fall into the bracket that you might be talking about. What I'm wondering, because I mean, obviously we're dealing with unknowns here, is, I mean, the top kids will get drafted and they know they're going to get drafted, but that second layer aren't sure. They kind of want to be drafted. So is there going to be kind of another version of the whole transfer portal where, hey, in terms of negotiating with their college coach, yeah, I want to see if I'm going to get drafted, and if I get drafted high enough, I might go. but maybe I won't go. So the college coach doesn't want to lose a good player, so I'm sure they'll be as accommodating as they can be. On the flip side, it's just another curveball to the college coaches in terms of, is this athlete coming back or not? We're not sure. So I'm just not sure. I'm not sure anybody is sure how that whole process is going to work out. Not so much this year, but in the ensuing years.
Well, I would tell you, and here's what everybody's going to say. Wow, this is even more opportunities for athletes. How good is this, right? But for a college coach, this is a third nightmare. I mean, besides portal and NIL in recruiting, now you've got to deal with this just before the NC2A tournament is laid out, all 64 teams. I mean, and it's not about the 64th team necessarily, but this is pressure on the top 8 to 16 teams and their coaches, because they're the ones that have gotten these athletes that are going to now be recruited for the Pro League. They're going to be offered. And if you're, here's a question, Jim and Bob, you can kind of think your way through this too. But if you were developing a basis for your league and your team, are you going to go and win right away? Or are you going to try to build with youth and get some of these really young kids and keep them happy and develop a just juggernaut team of dominating athletic ability and build through your community and build strong ties, and in 3 or 4 years just dominate for a long time? How would you do that if you were doing the selections for your group?
Bob, go ahead.
Well, I think it is a nightmare for a coach, a college coach. But so is the portal, and so is the fact that players are pretty much focused on themselves and not on team in general. So it's just a new time, a new era of sport in the United States. It kind of reflects where society is at right now. So how would I do it? I tend to think I might have to look at it like the basketball coaches looked at, one and done kind of thing. Get the best players when you can get them, and not get upset if they're going to leave, and try to create a situation or environment that is so good that they're going to want to stay. And that's where the NIL, becomes a big factor. And some programs are not going to be able to do that, because that really is just talking about the top programs. And I think second tier of schools may be better off not chasing all the top players and doing the opposite to develop a team.
Mick, and nobody's given it a great deal of thought here, but and I'm not sure what the contractual parameters are with the Pro League, but if you could do 2 or 3 year contracts as opposed to just a single year, I might be more inclined to do what you just described, as opposed to bringing in somebody who is no doubt a great player, but they're 32 years old. Do you want a younger player that's going to be with you a couple of years, or somebody's going to be, it's kind of a one and done. So, and again, there might be some league parameters that would impact that decision making, but I would be more inclined to say, hey, can we get a group of young kids that's going to stay together and see if we can do some damage? Maybe not right out of the gate, but a year or two down the road.
Especially if they were elite athletically, right?
For sure. And as you know, they're having been the national team coach, that coming out of college, that leap to the pros, that could be a big leap. So just because somebody was okay in college, they're still, and you see it now all the time where, these All-Americans, they go over to Europe and they're just not ready yet. And it takes 2 or 3 years before they can kind of get their game where they can be successful. And, hopefully we can get to that point here where the level of play is high enough where kids right out of college, they're not there yet. And they're going to have to, put in the time and pay their dues type of thing. But, there's a lot of decisions to be made by the coaches right now that will impact their teams for years to come, not just this upcoming season.
Are you surprised at these two things? One, that the draft is going to be held December 11th, and two, that it's not going to be in Tampa?
Well, from a PR perspective, being in Tampa would be, I think, a pretty good thing. The timing of the draft, I mean, football players have to declare usually right after the bowl games, but the draft itself isn't for 8 weeks down the road.
Yeah.
Baseball is something similar, where there's like 2 windows, and if you miss the first one, then you're at school for a couple of years. So I think it's a lot of pressure on kids. The kids, the people are going to get drafted or on the bubble of getting drafted. That's some pretty heavy decision making going on right during the NCAA tournament, final exams. I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. So, but given the start of the season, I'm not sure they had a lot of options, at least out of the gate here.
So there are 7 teams. There are 5 rounds. That's 35 college kids that can get drafted. How many can really play in the pro league in the first year? I mean, are good enough to play in the pro league from what you guys have seen? Do you have any kind of speculation?
Bob, you want to take that?
Well, yeah, I'll take it, Jim. I would say there's 6 to 8 players that I've been seeing in the college ranks that I think could step right in and play with the pros. I think it's very typical, and Jim had, mentioned this a little bit earlier. It's very similar to a player going on to the national team or going into the international scene right out of college. It usually takes them a couple of years to be able to be good at that level. But there are, I think, 6 to 8 players in the U.S. right now that can make that transition pretty easily.
What's your thought, Jim?
I'm sure there's 6 or 8 players. I tend to be more skeptical with that. In terms of I don't think, and it's no fault of the players, and I'm not 100% sure what the substitution rules are going to be with the pro league here. I don't know if they've settled on. The last number I heard was like 8%. But
I like 8. In fact, I've pushed 8 for a long time. John Cook at Nebraska is in agreement with that, I believe. We think 8 is a positive
pro league.
number. Yeah.
So with that in mind, the value is on 6 rotation players. 6 or 8 might be generous when it comes to 6 rotation players right out of college. 2 or 3 years down the road, maybe. Yeah, it's and that goes back to your original point, Mick. Do you want to invest in these kids for 2 or 3 years and keep them together, as opposed to hoping they can come in right out of college and be competitive? Now, if the other teams are dealing with the same issues, then it's a level playing field. But if you get some people that have already put in the 2 or 3 years across the net from you, your young team is going to have some challenges.
Well, and here's the other thing. We haven't talked about money. Nobody talked about money. But if you go for a young team, you can pigeonhole your resources to really bring in maybe a superstar with those young kids 2 or 3 years later, and you're not paying that full allotment out right away because you've got younger players. And I don't know what the rules are on that. Were you surprised that they were going to use a different ball than the Mikasa?
I must have missed that one. What ball are they using?
They wouldn't say, but they got a ball that somebody's making for them that they wouldn't say right away. And the whole world uses the Mikasa. Mikasa's got the best deal ever. The FIVB, every small country in the world has to buy Mikasa balls. Every pro league that I know of plays with the Mikasa ball. And maybe Cristobal may have gotten molten into the Norseca as a alternate ball. But man, oh man, if they've done that, how will that affect their play when they switch to the Mikasa for the national team programs?
Well, I remember when was it maybe 2 World Cups ago when Adidas came out with a new soccer ball, and the players just went crazy because they go, this ball stinks, So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that one goes.
So that's 2 things that I picked up there that I thought was interesting. Ren, for instance, is their sponsor in uniforms. They have never produced a series of uniforms. Their uniforms have been pretty much standard junior club uniforms. And Lexi Sun, when she came out of Nebraska, they ran a series of special clothing for Lexi that was sold out almost overnight. And they've never done anything since then. So this is a big task for Ren also, don't you think?
Okay, I found this on the web for big task for Ren also. Check it out.
Oh, my phone is talking to me. AI has got me right here at home. Did you hear that? That's pretty good.
You have to watch what you say around technology now.
Alexa is going to check out Ren Sporting Goods. Holy cow.
I'm not familiar with the apparel at all, so I'll plead the fifth on that one.
All right, Bob, you have any input on that?
No, just that Ren sponsors us, and we have all Ren stuff on right now. So it's pretty good. It's pretty good stuff. So I can see why the pro league went to them, and they can custom make just about anything as far as I know.
The quality of the garment is really nice. I will say that. Jim, we're going to have to get you a shirt and a slip over here.
Hey, I'm just make sure you get it in a large enough size.
Well, I think we want to get back. First of all, I think we should all go to the party in Tampa on Saturday night and really see what the PVF is going to do. I really think that we want to revisit this again here closer to the start of their season in January, because we want to look at these rosters and see who we think have developed the best rosters, and we'll see up to 30 players. That's what I heard. Is that what you guys heard?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. So I think we've got a lot more questions to ask, but I hope this answers questions for our audience too, because this is pretty interesting. Every time I do one of these, I get more questions than I do answers. And the one thing we didn't hear anything about is a television contract. So unless these guys get a television contract, they're not going to go anyplace. So maybe the next time we have them on, we can announce who they're going with for their television and how they're going to get the product out there. But right now, Bob, I'm going to turn it back to you. You can close this down. And boy, Jen Spicher was good today. We need to have her back, and thank everybody for listening for sure.
Well, I think that's a wrap for us, Mick. Until next time, it's been great to spend some time with Jen Spicher and the Pro Volleyball Federation today, and we welcome everybody back to our next Wednesday weekly buzz.